The kingdom of Eryndale slumbered under a deep, starlit night, the silvery beams casting shadows that danced across the castle walls like living phantoms. All was quiet, save for the faint, cautious footsteps of Princess Amara. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the soft, guttering flame of a single candle, its glow just enough to light the narrow passageway that twisted through the forgotten parts of her ancestral home. A stirring had awoken within her, a calling from somewhere deeper than she could place. It had come in whispers, first faint, then loud enough to pull her from sleep. Her heart beat faster as she approached a long-sealed door, almost hidden by layers of cobwebs and dust that had claimed it for ages. The door creaked as she pressed against it, the sound like a long-forgotten sigh. It opened to reveal a small chamber cloaked in shadows, filled with relics that seemed to throb with an ancient energy. Her candlelight flickered against the cold stone walls, casting shapes that writhed and swayed, as if echoing her own quiet fear. Among the clutter of time-worn objects, one item drew her gaze, a locket resting atop an old velvet pillow, untouched by dust. It was beautiful, even in its tarnished, faded state. The silver seemed to pulse faintly under the glow of her candle, as though it held some silent heartbeat of its own. Intricate engravings spiraled across its surface, symbols she could not decipher but felt as though she had always known. Her fingers reached for it, half in hesitation, half in wonder. As her hand brushed the cold metal, a chill shot up her arm, freezing her breath. She tried to pull back, but the locket seemed to cling to her, as if it had waited for her touch alone. The air grew heavy, a presence settling around her like a veil, and she realized with a strange certainty that she was no longer alone. Amara. The sound was a faint whisper, as though coming from within the locket itself, and the room seemed to draw in around her, wrapping her in a tight embrace. She felt as if she had been thrust back through time, witnessing shadows of those who had come before her. There were glimmers of faces, all holding eyes that looked just like hers. They were her ancestors, her blood, and they seemed to gaze at her with a quiet expectation, as if awaiting a decision. Amara shivered but did not pull away. The locket's presence was both dark and comforting, like a forgotten memory that held a piece of her soul. She could not explain the certainty that grew within her, but she knew this locket was hers to bear. It had chosen her as much as she had found it. The moment she clasped it around her neck, the air shifted, and a strange warmth bloomed from her chest. Shadows danced in her vision, the faintest murmur of voices weaving through the silence, like fragments of secrets buried deep beneath the earth. A fragment of parchment slipped from beneath the locket's pillow as she fastened it. She took it gingerly, unfolding it with hands that now felt steadier, as if she'd been waiting for this very moment all her life. The script was ancient, faded, but the words formed as though they were waiting to be read by her eyes alone. To the one who bears the blood and the heart, this locket reveals what is hidden, what is yours. But beware, for in every secret lies a cost. Seek not only with your mind, but with your soul, lest you be devoured by the shadows that guard it. Her fingers trace the words, their warning settling like a cold weight within her. She had heard legends, whispered tales of her forebears who had dabbled in magic, weaving spells that kept their kingdom prosperous, bound to the land itself. But no one spoke of such things openly, and certainly not of magic so closely guarded that even her own father had never mentioned it. Now, here it lay before her. This locket she had never known existed, holding power over her ancestors, over her land, over her. Amara's heart pounded. She knew with a certainty that gnawed at her that her life had changed in that moment. She could sense the beginnings of something vast and mysterious, something as deep as the forest at the edge of the kingdom, as dark and hidden as the pathless night. Her ancestors had left her a legacy, one bound not in titles or gold, but in something stranger, something alive. As she turned to leave, the faintest murmur echoed through the chamber once more. She heard her name whispered, tenderly, like a caress from shadows that seemed to linger with regret. The chill returned, a shiver brushing down her spine as she clutched the locket closer, her fingers brushing its cold surface as though to reassure herself it was real. The journey had begun, and she could feel the weight of her ancestors upon her shoulders. She had stepped into a legacy as ancient as the stones around her, a path she had yet to understand, but knew she could not escape. And as she stepped back into the darkness of the castle corridor, a faint warmth pulsed from the locket, almost as if it was alive, waiting, and eager to reveal the secrets she had yet to uncover. The dawn came cold and grey, shrouding the kingdom in a mist that clung to the ground like a ghostly veil. Princess Amara awoke from troubled dreams, her fingers still clasped around the locket's cool surface. Images from her sleep lingered, glimpses of dark trees standing tall and silent, as if guarding ancient secrets, and a faint trail winding through the mist. Her mind urged her to stay within the safe stone walls of her family's castle, but her heart, her very soul, pulled her elsewhere, whispering to her of something beyond. She found herself dressing quickly, her feet guiding her as though bewitched, down the grand staircase and out the castle's doors before the sun had fully risen. The morning air was thick with quiet, and the sky seemed to darken as she moved beyond the castle grounds. The world around her faded, shifting as she entered the outskirts of Eryndale's fabled forest. The villagers warned that it was enchanted, a place of ancient spirits and forgotten realms, and yet she walked onward, drawn by a power that thrummed from the locket at her neck. As she stepped beneath the forest canopy, the mist grew denser, each tendril curling around her, blurring the world in a silvery haze. Shadows shifted in the corners of her vision, faint glimpses of movement that vanished as she turned her head. Trees loomed tall, their trunks twisted and gnarled, reaching skyward like fingers clawing towards some unseen light. The path twisted and turned, narrowing until it was little more than a faint trail of crushed leaves and broken twigs. With every step, the locket grew warmer, pulsing softly, as if alive, guiding her deeper into the heart of the enchanted forest. She could feel its pull, a gentle but unyielding tug at her very essence. An hour passed, though time felt stretched and elusive, as if she had stepped outside of it entirely. The deeper she ventured, the more the forest seemed to shift, becoming something older, something stranger, a realm that did not belong to the world she had known. Every tree seemed to whisper in a language she did not understand, leaves rustling secrets with each gust of wind. Her heart quickened, her breath coming faster, yet a calm settled over her, a sense of belonging that surprised her. Then she saw it, a clearing bathed in dim light, where the mist hung thick like a shroud. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak, far larger than any tree she had ever seen. Its trunk was massive, twisted with age, roots snaking out like the limbs of a sleeping giant. And at its base, partially hidden by moss and shadow, was a stone altar, its surface worn smooth by time. The locket pulsed violently, heat surging against her chest, compelling her forward. She knelt before the altar, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold surface, feeling the age and weight of the centuries that had passed over it. Her eyes drifted to an inscription, faint and worn, carved into the stone, a language that felt foreign and familiar all at once. The words were lost to time, but the meaning seeped into her, their essence like a murmur in her soul. The locket's power was bound to the forest, to the spirits that dwelled here, and to the bloodline of her ancestors who had once safeguarded it. But more than that, the altar held an echo of the sorcerer who had cast a shadow upon her family, the one whose curse had fallen upon her line. And then she saw him, not in flesh, but in a vision summoned by the locket's magic. A figure cloaked in shadow appeared before her mind's eye, his face hidden, but his eyes piercing, burning with an ancient, jealous fury. His voice, soft and cold, echoed in her mind, carrying a warning that crawled beneath her skin. Only those of pure blood may break the shadow's bond. But beware, for the forest has its price. The words sent a shiver through her, but even as she trembled, the vision faded, and she was alone once more, with only the locket's silent warmth to comfort her. She could feel the sorcerer's curse, like a chill on her blood, a darkness that sought to claim her as it had sought to claim her ancestors. Yet beneath the fear lay a spark of defiance, a flame that flickered within her, small but unyielding. The forest shifted around her, the mist thinning slightly, as if in answer to her resolve. She could sense the spirits of her ancestors, watching, waiting. The locket's weight settled on her chest, no longer as a burden, but as a reminder of her duty, to break the curse, to reclaim the magic that had once been their legacy. She rose from the altar, her eyes fixed on the path before her. She knew now that this journey would not be easy, that the shadows lurking in the forest were as real as the breath in her lungs. But she also knew that she would face them. She would seek the truth, even if it lay buried in the darkest reaches of this ancient wood. As she turned to leave the clearing, the trees seemed to bow in respect, branches brushing against her in a faint whisper of approval. And as she walked, the locket's warmth pulsed steadily, a heartbeat that was hers alone, guiding her further into the mysteries of her legacy and toward the trials that awaited her in the heart of Eryndale's enchanted forest. The forest path twisted like a thread unwinding, leading Princess Amara deeper into its shadows, where light scarcely dared to tread. Each step brought her closer to the truth hidden within her locket, a truth that had haunted her ancestors and bound them to an ancient curse. As the forest darkened, the pulse of the locket grew steadier, each beat aligning with her own heart, merging their destinies. Amara touched the locket with gentle reverence, feeling its warmth against her skin. In the silence, she could almost hear faint whispers, murmurings of a power long dormant. Her fingers traced the intricate engravings. The delicate symbols she now realized were more than mere decoration. They were keys, unlocking fragments of a forgotten story, one that had waited for her alone. Images began to form in her mind, visions slipping between her thoughts like water through cupped hands. She saw a kingdom bathed in gold, flourishing under the rule of her ancestors, who had once commanded a magic woven from the very soul of Eryndale. They had been protectors, bound to the land by a pact older than memory. But that bond had been severed, shattered by betrayal. She saw faces like hers, eyes filled with sorrow and strength, caught in a struggle to protect their legacy from a shadow that grew ever closer. And in the background, looming over them all, was the sorcerer, a figure wrapped in darkness, with a smile as cold as the grave. His jealousy had tainted their power, twisting it into something dangerous, something cursed. His enchantments had sealed away their magic, chaining it within the locket, a trap waiting for the right bloodline to attempt its release. A tremor of fear crept up her spine, but it did not shake her. Instead, it steeled her resolve. She understood now that the locket held more than just power. It held the memories, the secrets, and the very essence of her family's strength. But with those gifts came the curse, a darkness that would consume her if she sought to wield it without caution. She was her family's only hope of breaking the curse, but to do so, She would have to confront the shadows that had been haunting Eryndale for centuries. The locket grew warmer, and the whispers grew louder, fragments of voices calling her name, pulling her closer. She stepped off the path, moving through dense underbrush and over gnarled roots until she reached a small moonlit pond hidden among the trees. The water's surface was still, like a mirror, reflecting her image with uncanny clarity. And as she looked into its depths, she saw something more. A vision, unbidden and terrible. The water showed her a future where the curse went unbroken. A vision of Eryndale shrouded in shadows, its once thriving fields reduced to ash. People moved like ghosts through the streets, their faces hollow, their eyes void. She could feel the pain and despair leaching from the vision, a weight pressing down on her heart until she thought it might stop. And then the vision shifted. She saw herself, older and weary, her face lined with sorrow and defeat, clutching the locket as though it were her only anchor. This was the price of failure, the curse's toll on her bloodline, a destiny bound to shadows if she could not release the locket's magic. Amara closed her eyes, steadying herself. She could not, would not, allow that future to come to pass. The curse had taken enough. She would pay whatever price was required to free her family, to restore the bond with the land, and lift the shadow that had plagued them for so long. In that moment of resolve, the locket flared, flooding her senses with a new vision. This time, it was of her ancestors, a council of protectors standing together in defiance of the sorcerer. She could feel their strength, their determination, and it filled her with courage. Each of them had faced a choice, and each had sacrificed for the power that lay within her now. As the vision faded, Amara became aware of a strange clarity settling within her. The forest felt less dark, the shadows less daunting. She had seen the curse for what it was, a reflection of the sorcerer's twisted desires, his need to control that which he could not possess. But the locket's secrets were hers to wield, and it was her choice to bear them. She lifted her chin, the forest seeming to bend around her in acknowledgement. She would embrace this legacy, both the power and the darkness it contained, and walk forward with her ancestors' strength as her guide. Her fingers brushed the locket once more, feeling its warmth settle within her, a silent promise between herself and the magic she now carried. The locket, alive with newfound purpose, seemed to hum in response, binding her fate to the secrets she had uncovered. It was no longer just an heirloom. It was a key, a weapon, and a responsibility she would carry forward. The forest shifted as she turned, the path unfolding before her, its darkness softened by the faint light of understanding. With each step, she grew more certain. She had accepted the locket's secrets, embraced its hidden magic, and now she was ready to face the trials that awaited, ready to defy the curse that had plagued her bloodline. The forest whispered its approval as she walked forward, her spirit unbroken, her heart steeled against the shadows. The path to her destiny lay before her, cloaked in mystery, but she would walk it without fear, guided by the power of her ancestors and the secrets of the locket. The forest grew darker as Princess Amara pressed on, each step carrying her closer to the heart of its ancient mysteries. The trees thickened, their twisted branches casting shadows that seemed to reach for her, as if aware of the trials that lay ahead. She felt the locket pulsing steadily, its warmth now a steady rhythm, guiding her forward. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation, as though the forest itself held its breath, waiting for her to face what lay beyond. She came upon a clearing where the mist lay still and silent, cloaking the ground in a silver sheen. There, beneath the light of a waning moon, stood a figure cloaked in shadow, a presence that radiated a cold darkness, a memory of power long denied. Amara knew, with a certainty that struck her soul, that this was the sorcerer, the one who had cursed her family, his spirit bound to this forest, to these trials. Though not truly alive, his presence felt painfully real, each movement stirring the mist around him like a chill wind. His voice slid through the clearing, soft and insidious, carrying the weight of ages and regrets. "So, the last of your line has come," he said, his eyes gleaming beneath the hood. "Are you prepared to pay the price for your family's folly? To face the shadows your blood has woven?" Amara's spine straightened. She held her chin high, the locket's weight a steady reminder of her purpose. "I am," she replied, her voice unwavering. She would not flinch before this shadow, not after all she had seen, not after the pain and hope of her ancestors had passed through her veins like fire. The sorcerer extended one pale, ghostly hand, and with a flick of his fingers, the air shifted. Shadows coiled around him, forming a twisting darkness that spread like ink across the clearing, shaping themselves into 3 towering forms. Figures that seemed alive with malice and the weight of unspoken fears. He gestured to them, his smile cold and knowing. "Then prove it, child of Eryndale," he murmured. "Face the trial of shadows. These are your fears, your doubts, and the sins of your bloodline. If you can overcome them, you may yet break the curse. But fail." His voice trailed off, the threat lingering, heavy and dark as night. The first shadow stepped forward, its shape blurring as it shifted into an image of her father, his face lined with grief and disapproval. His voice was familiar, but tinged with something colder, more detached. "You are not strong enough, Amara. The curse will consume you, as it has those before you. Turn back, before you lead our family into ruin." The words struck her, piercing her with a fear she hadn't realized she held. For so long, she had feared that she would be too weak to break the curse, that her actions would bring disaster upon her family. But she looked at the shadow, and beneath its surface, she saw only a reflection of her own insecurities. This was not her father, nor his doubts, but hers alone. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her chin. "I know my strength, and I know my duty," she whispered, her voice steady. "I will not be consumed by fear." And with those words, the shadow trembled, faltered, and faded into nothing. The second shadow emerged, this one forming into the shape of the sorcerer himself, his eyes gleaming with a cruel fire. His voice echoed, mocking. "Your ancestors betrayed me, taking magic that was mine to wield. They were weak, deceitful, just as you are. The power within you is a lie." Anger flared within her, a deep, simmering rage that startled her. But as she gazed into the shadow's eyes, she saw beyond his taunts to the truth. This trial was a test of her own self-worth, her belief in her bloodline's legacy. Her ancestors had not stolen magic. They had safeguarded it, bound to it by ancient promises. Their power and hers was as true as the stars above. She gripped the locket, feeling its warmth like a light in the dark. "My power is my own, and my family's bond is true," she declared, her voice cutting through the shadow. It twisted, shrieking as if in pain, before it too dissolved into mist. Only one shadow remained, but it was formless. A shifting darkness that held no shape, no face. This was the last of the trials, the trial of truth. It wrapped around her like smoke, whispering doubts, secrets, fears buried deep in her heart. She heard her own voice, filled with guilt, uncertainty, and the weight of every choice she'd made. In that darkness, she felt the enormity of her burden, the cost of wielding the locket, of bearing her family's curse. A question lingered, unspoken. Are you willing to carry this, knowing it may consume you, knowing it may require everything? Amara closed her eyes, feeling the depth of that question sink into her bones. The truth was harsh, unyielding. She did not know if she would succeed, if her strength would be enough. But she knew, with all the certainty that pulsed from the locket's warmth, that she could not turn away. Her voice was a whisper, steady and resolute. "I accept this burden. I accept the cost." Her words hung in the air, filling the darkness with a soft glow that grew brighter, more piercing, until it consumed the shadow in a blinding light. When she opened her eyes, the clearing was empty, the sorcerer's spirit gone, the shadows vanished. She stood alone, the locket warm and quiet against her chest, its pulse soft but steady. She had faced her fears, her doubts, her very soul, and she had emerged unbroken. The forest seemed to sigh, releasing its tension, as though relieved. She felt the weight of the trials lift, and with it, the faintest sense of something else. A bond, fragile but real. A promise sealed between herself and her ancestors. The curse had not yet lifted, but the locket's secrets had been revealed, and she had proven her strength. And as she turned to leave the clearing, A soft light appeared on the path before her, guiding her onward toward the final revelation that would bring her journey to its end. The forest lay still, as though holding its breath in anticipation of the final act. A faint light flickered along the narrow path, a quiet flame in the vast darkness, leading Princess Amara through the last steps of her journey. She followed it, the locket's warmth now a steady, comforting presence against her heart. It was as though the very air around her had softened, the ancient woods bending in solemn acknowledgement of the trials she had overcome. Ahead of her loomed an ancient archway, overgrown with ivy, its stone etched with symbols similar to those on the locket. It was a gateway into a place hidden from mortal sight, an inner sanctum where her ancestors had once convened to bind their magic to the land. She felt the weight of history press upon her as she stepped through, entering a small clearing bathed in an otherworldly light. At the center of the clearing stood an altar like the one she had found before, but older, worn smooth by the hands of those who had come before her. As she approached, the light around the altar coalesced into a figure, a woman draped in flowing robes, her face solemn yet kind, her eyes bearing a wisdom that transcended time. Amara's breath caught. She knew instinctively that this was her ancestor, the first to wield the magic bound within the locket, the matriarch who had anchored her family's bond to the land. The woman regarded her with a gaze that felt both tender and searching, and then she spoke, her voice soft but resonant, like leaves rustling in a sacred grove. "Amara, child of my blood," she said, her words woven with ancient sorrow and strength. "You have come far. You have faced the shadows that guard this legacy and the truths that lie within. But now, the final choice remains. The decision that will shape your fate and the fate of our line." The ancestor extended her hand, and from within her palm materialized an image, a vision of Eryndale glowing with life, its fields rich with harvest, its people thriving. Amara could feel the peace and prosperity radiating from it, a future her family's magic would bring if the curse were broken. But as the vision lingered, the woman's face darkened. Her hand shifted, and a second vision rose. A darker possibility, showing Eryndale in ruin, the land withered and scorched, the castle crumbling into dust. She saw herself, her own face aged and weary, standing alone in a desolate landscape, clutching the locket. But it no longer glowed with warmth. Its light had gone cold, extinguished. "The locket holds power," her ancestor continued, her voice low, as though uttering an oath. "But power demands sacrifice. To lift the curse, to reclaim our legacy, you must choose what you are willing to give." Her gaze grew softer, sorrowful. "You may keep the locket, bound forever to this power, to our family's magic, and Eryndale shall prosper. But this path requires that you give up your freedom, bound to the magic's will, as I once was." Amara's heart tightened. She knew now the toll her ancestor had paid. The life she had surrendered to wielded the magic that kept Eryndale whole. Her duty had cost her everything, her choices, her future, all given in service to the land and her people. The ancestor's hand lowered, and the visions faded. She looked upon Amara with eyes softened by understanding. "Or," she whispered, "you may cast the locket away, burying its magic within this forest, hidden from those who would seek it. Eryndale will remain unbound, free of the curse, but it shall be unprotected, vulnerable to the world's shadows." The weight of the choice settled upon Amara, heavy as the shadows she had faced. She felt the locket against her chest, its warmth both a comfort and a reminder of all it demanded. She could feel her ancestors' gaze upon her, their expectations woven with hope and sorrow, waiting to see if she would continue the legacy or break free from it. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of her heart, feeling the pulse of the locket's magic. She thought of her family, of Eryndale, of the people who looked to her with quiet trust. But she also thought of herself, of the dreams she had, the life she had once imagined beyond the walls of duty. To keep the locket would be to sacrifice herself, to become a vessel for her ancestors' power, bound forever to the forest's magic. To cast it away was to deny her family's legacy, to relinquish the bond that had shaped them. But it was to choose freedom, both for herself and for her descendants. At last, she opened her eyes, the answer clear within her. With a steady hand, she unclasped the locket from her neck. Its warmth faded as she held it out, cradling it in her palm for one final moment. She felt a pang of loss, as though parting with a piece of her soul, yet beneath it lay a strange peace. She had made her choice. Amara stepped forward, placing the locket upon the altar. The clearing seemed to sigh, a quiet acceptance as the magic within it withdrew, sinking back into the earth. Her ancestor's figure smiled, a soft, bittersweet smile that held pride and understanding. The vision faded, leaving only the altar, bare and silent, and the forest, its shadows lifting like a curtain at dawn. As she turned to leave, the forest opened before her, bathed in the soft light of morning. The locket was gone, its secrets and powers buried. But in its place, she felt the freedom that her choice had granted. She had honored her family's legacy, but she had also claimed her own destiny, unbound by the shadows of the past. And so, Amara walked forward, away from the altar, her steps light and unburdened, her heart free as she returned to Eryndale, no longer just a princess but a keeper of her own fate. The locket's memory lingered within her, a quiet strength, and she knew that while she had surrendered its magic, she had gained something far greater. The freedom to shape her life and the life of her kingdom, unbound by ancient shadows.